Hello and welcome back, Lady Joyful here for Sasayaki Glitter, and today I am making two cards. I don't know about where you are, but here in Finland it's currently quite cold and snowy, so I thought it was the ideal time to play with this Winter Peggy stamp and make two different snowy day cards. They're both the same but different, as you'll see as we go along. So I'm starting out by colouring in Peggy herself, and I have printed her twice, one onto a large panel that will be a one layer card, and the second one I've printed slightly smaller onto another panel, a smaller piece of paper that I will be fussy cutting her out. So I'm using my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers to colour her in. And I'm starting by colouring in her skin, and you can see the caps off to the side showing which colours I am using. And I'm just doing the same process on each image, so I won't show it twice or will be here forever, but everything that I do on the one image I will repeat on the second image. Now I'm moving on to colouring her hair, and I decided to make her a brunette. So I'm starting by laying in my darkest brown in all the shadow areas. And then it will move on to my next lighter brown. And I'm trying to follow the wave of the drawn lines of the illustration to give her that kind of wavy hair that she was drawn with. So I'm moving on to I think this is my lightest colour now, and just filling in the gaps. Oh, there may be one more. Okay, and then I will colour in her boots. I decided to do these dark brown as well, but I wanted them to be slightly different from the colours in her hair. So these pens I'm using now are Yosoo alcohol markers. And again, I'm starting with my shadows and laying in all the shadow areas, and here you can kind of follow the lines that are drawn into the stamp, show where the folds are in the fabric of the boots. So that gives you a good guide as to where to put your shadows. And then I will just go all over the top of it with my lightest brown, adding in the colour to the highlight areas. With that done, I will move on to colouring her scarf. I chose to go for light blue, and I'm back to the Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers here. I only used two shades of blue, and I'm using the same ones on her hat. I only have two shades of these TB blues, so it was easiest just to use the two and kind of go back in with the darkest of the two in the darker areas if they needed to be more contrasting than they were. And after some debate, I decided to use the same blues on her leg. And I am putting my shadows off on the left hand side, so all the colours are dark on the left, then on the right. The right is where the highlights are. This is how I tend to prefer to colour my images, and I find that being consistent across all the images I do just makes it easier, because then I don't have to think about, okay, which way is the light coming this time. Although of course if there's a specific light source, then that changes things, but generally speaking I try to do that my light is coming from the right and my shadows are therefore on the left hand side. So now I am colouring in her jacket, and I decided to go with a kind of light caramelly colour, I'm imagining this as being a kind of suede jacket that she's wearing. and I'm using a mixture of the Yosoo and the Spectrum Noir markers. You can mix and match most alcohol markers. They're all alcohol based, so if you work at it you should be able to get them all to blend. For her dress I'm using some dark greens, which I felt contrasted nicely with the rest of her outfit. I'm being careful to make sure there's a highlight on the pleats of her skirt. And you can hear my cat in the background. So then I'm going to add, the last bit I need to add colour to was the little heart on her kit, which I just did one shade. And then I'm adding some texture to the bubble on her hat with some light grey. So now I'm going to build the scene. This is the 1-layer card. I'm using a birch tree stencil, and there'll be a link in the description below to which stencil this is, because I can't remember off the top of my head. And I'm just using my alcohol markers to colour in the stencil. So I'm using caramel to get the lines in the tree. And I haven't marked off my image, but that's fine because as I'm hand colouring it, I can just intentionally avoid the bits I don't want colour on, so that I'm not colouring over her. So then I'm using sky blue to put in the background, and just filling in all the gaps. And some of these smaller branches, I did have some trouble that my ink kind of went under and lost the detail a bit, but you will see how I go back in and fix that a bit later. But for now I'm just again going by hand and colouring in all those gaps and just carefully colouring around Peggy as I go to make sure I'm not colouring over any of the colouring I had done. So now I will remove the stencil, and you can see the trees are ready, and I used a die cut scrap piece to create my hill, as you can see there. I felt like it wasn't quite defined enough, so here first I'm going in with a white gel pen just to fill in some of those branches that had disappeared. Just carefully tracing along the lines, and it doesn't have to be perfect because they're trees and it's nature, and nature is not perfect, so it doesn't matter if there's a few lines going on a slightly different curve from how the stencil was designed, for example. So I will just draw all of those in, and then once I am happy with that, I'm going to move on to adding a bit more definition around the trees and the snow. Because at the moment the trees just kind of go into the snow and kind of merge. So I'm using my lightest grey, which is a Yosoo marker, and tracing along the snow line with that, and also in some places tracing along the shadowier edge of the trees. So again, the left hand side, because I have my light coming from the right hand side. So just sketch along the sides of each of the trees and some of the bigger branches as well. And then I will use my blender pen just to soften the edge out a bit and help it blend in and not look so harsh. And then I'm adding some cast shadow with that same grey, just coming from her feet, and again I will use my blender pen to blend that out. With that done, I move on to stamping my sentiment, and this sentiment is from a stamp set from the cat's Pajamas. And I'm using Simon Says Stamp Barely Beige ink, which makes it look like it's written in the snow, and I really like that. It's kind of subtle. So then for my other card I'm using a pattern paper instead of the stencil. So So I'm just adhering that directly to my card base. And you may have seen this adhesive tip in some of my other videos. Then I will just carefully trim off the edge. You can use a craft knife or scissors, whichever you find easiest. I like to trim it down after I've adhered it because then I'm more likely to get it straight. So then I also adhered a snowbank, just a cut snowbank, die cut snowbank, and did the same sentiment. And that completes those cards that are the same but different. Thank you for watching this video featuring Sasayaki Glitter's Winter Peggy digital stamp. You can find more information down below, including links to all the products used, and there will also be more information on the blog. If you enjoyed this video, you can leave a comment, press like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks and bye.